Hello, I am Xarkun, and today we will be going over the patch notes for the November 2023 update in World of Warships Legends, which you could refer to as the Black Friday update. There's a lot of stuff to cover here, so I'll try to be as quick and efficient as I can. But we're going to take a look at the advanced version of the patch notes that Wargaming sends the community contributors before they publish them to the rest of the general public. So these patch notes should be complete, but sometimes they change certain details when they go live. We'll also take a look at the balance article because I have that too, and there's a lot of balance changes coming. Pretty much all of them for the better, I think, but we'll get into that momentarily. First up, we'll take a look at what's happening. There's, of course, new black ships coming to the game. It's going to be headlined by a B version of the Turpits, which I think was one of the first premiums to ever debut in this game. Not sure exactly what all the rest of them are, but there will be a dedicated article published sometime soon. And then for the first event that we've got to cover, it's this thing called the HoloLive production calendar. It's a 4-week HoloLive calendar thing that will give you the opportunity to unlock free commander guises for these people, these weeb type people. I don't think I need to read their names, but you complete all these little tasks every week for the update, then you get access to these guises so you can change your historical commanders into these weeb ladies or whatever. So, uh, if anybody's interested in that, more weeb content, well, it's coming. But as for the main feature of the update, we've got the Divine Region campaign. Oh, and by the way, this calendar thing, is apparently not available for the mobile version. Anyway, we've got this Divine Regent campaign, and the prize is the Tier 8 Premium IJN Battleship Heisen, which has 12 16-inch guns and marks, what is this, the third IJN Premium that has come to this game, following the Musashi at Tier 8 and then the Iwami. Now we've got the Heisen, so we've got three different IJN Tier 8 Premium battleships. This Heisen was available for rent a couple of weeks ago. I played it. I thought it was mediocre, and I couldn't see a reason why you would want this ship over the Iwami if you already have it. However, apparently Wargaming agreed, because once we get to the balance change article, we'll see that they're actually going to buff Heisen compared to what it was when they had it available for rent. So it might actually be a good ship. We'll have to test it out to see. But of course, we get the breakdown of the campaign, nothing unusual or special here. So we go to the next thing, which is the debut of fleet battles. Fleet battles are here, and you can compete against other fleets in a 5-player division each Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday during the update. There will be more information in a detailed article or a dedicated article next week. They've also changed the fleet enhancement system. Port of Steel now has an additional 4th and 5th upgrades, and all other enhancements get an additional 5th upgrade. Of course, I think the cost for those will have increased, but it turns out we're going to be able to buff our bonuses from the fleets just a little bit more, which should be nice. The bonuses are already nice, but buffing them more should be cool. Then, of course, the alternate British battleship line, which is in early access, goes to full access for the update. So we'll be able to get the Tier 8 Duncan, which hopefully I'll be able to afford on day one. Then we've got another season of brawls, including no torpedo destroyer fights. The first season for Tier 6 cruisers starts on November 20th. It says there's 3 seasons, no details on the second or third, but at least for the first one, Tier 6 cruisers. And I guess the mobile version is being upgraded from the quote slim to the quote full version of the client. And there is an exclusive reward for 7 days of logging in. You get a little Tier 2 premium German ship. or a Tier 3 premium German battleship, none of which I think are especially interesting, but that might be nice if you're a mobile player and you can get these rewards for free. Beyond that, we've got the overview tab now on the mobile version, so you can read about the ships that you have. Although historically, this overview hasn't necessarily been super accurate. But then we get a legendary bureau project for not a battleship, but a cruiser, a heavy cruiser at that. The legendary and broken Zhao. We'll see how broken it actually is in this game. But it's got 20 torpedoes, says it's got a high rate of fire, and it does a lot of damage. Should more or less be the souped up version of the Mogami Ibuki type cruisers, and I suspect it'll be pretty good. Then it does mention balance changes, and a little bit of a spoiler alert for that. There is a nerf to both the Schlieffen and the Shimakaze. I suspect a lot of people will be happy about that. But that's pretty much all there is in the patch notes for the update. Although I did notice there's, these minor fixes down here. I did notice though that they did say they are changing the overview traits on some of these ships to make them not inaccurate as some of them are right now, so that's nice. But also, this is good. We've added the ability to create permanent historical camouflages. You can find a list of the ships that can mount these camos in the Ministry of Balance article, which we'll be taking a look at here momentarily. But all of those ships where they have the permanent camos available for paint, but you can't actually make them, looks like pretty much all of them will suddenly become available with the next update, which is fantastic because I have like 800 CC camos that I need to melt into paint. So I will be making a lot of these permanent camos because all of them across the board look pretty nice. In any case, let's jump over to the balance changes. And we'll start with the Schlieffen. The Schlieffen is getting a nerf to the main battery reload, adding 2 seconds onto that reload, and also the base reload time of the secondaries for the 150s and the 105s is getting increased, which honestly I don't think that's a bad idea. Schlieffen can do a stupid amount of damage just by pushing in thanks to these crazy secondaries, so it would make sense that they're going to nerf them. I suspected this would be coming for a long time. But then we've got a buff to another legendary ship, the Stalingrad. First and foremost, the rear turret firing angles for Stalingrad have been improved to allow for firing from extreme angles at long-distance targets. I haven't played the Stalingrad since it was loaned to me when it first debuted, so I can't really remember how poor or good the angles were, but they're getting improved, as is the main battery AP shell damage, which is increased from 8K to 8.8K. And then the Stalingrad is getting HE shells. No idea why it did not have these HE shells to begin with, but they will do maximum of 4,500 damage. They've got a 33% fire chance and 51 millimeters of pen, which is good. And they are changing the HP distribution from the ship to put a little bit less HP in the bow and in the casemates and superstructure, which should ultimately mean the ship is more tanky. And that'll be interesting for those of you who have it. I think it'll suddenly become a much more effective cruiser. And speaking of effective cruisers, well, Alaska is apparently overshadowed by other legendary tier cruisers, so they're enhancing her capabilities across the board. Main battery firing range is getting a tiny little buff by 0.15 km, which is almost nothing, but crucially, the reload is being reduced from a base of 20 to 18 seconds. And there is a slight nerf here, though. The fire duration is increased from 30 to 45 seconds, which is actually a major nerf, at least theoretically, to this ship's survivability. Those extra 15 seconds that the fire ticks for, that's a lot of damage. But like with the Stalingrad, they're changing the distribution of the HP in the various parts of the ship, and they're also improving the sonar consumable by increasing its duration, its range for ship and torpedo. detection. So, all in all, this will probably be a pretty substantial buff to the Alaska. I suspect it'll perform better than it ever has, and it'll also be potentially at least slightly tankier. And then a nerf that I think pretty much anybody can get behind, the torpedoes on the Shimakaze, as I've maintained for a long time, are not overpowered. Okay. A lot of people have trouble dealing with them, but that's because they don't pay attention to the map. The Japanese torpedoes are the easiest torpedoes to dodge. They get spotted from nearly 2 kilometers away, and they tend to spread out for a lot. So, map awareness and honestly, a background in playing destroyers is all you need to render most Shimas a non threat. That's my opinion anyway. You can let me know if you disagree in the comments, but that's what I think. In any case, though, the Shimakaze, along with a lot of other destroyers in this game, have absolutely outrageous and ridiculous concealment. There's no universe in which the Shimakaze needs to have sub 5 km concealment. It does, though. So, what they're doing is nerfing the base detectability of the ship from 6.7 to 6.9 km, only a difference of 200 meters, but it might mean if your concealment on Shima is, I don't know, 4.9, maybe that means it is now 5.1, which is at least a little bit of a nerf to its ridiculous concealment. Honestly, I think they should go a little bit more extreme on this and pretty much nerf destroyer concealment across the board because no destroyer in this game needs to be spotted at less than like 5.5 kilometers. That's my opinion. You can let me know what you think, but at least this is a step in a good direction for the Shimakaze, and it'll maybe make it a little bit more detectable. Then for the Hyzen, which when I had it rented, I thought it was a pretty mediocre ship, especially because it started out with a 36-second base reload, which is outrageously long, especially when you look at it with the efficacy of the guns, which didn't seem all that special to me. So they're buffing the reload to a more manageable 33.5 seconds. They're giving it a little bit of a range buff. They're giving it a fairly good accuracy buff to the Sigma, increasing it by, well, only 0.5, so I don't know how much of a difference that'll make. Little bit of an increase to the speed, though, so the top speed is 29 knots, and a little bit of a buff to the detectability, which is always nice. So hopefully with these buffs, the Hyzen will be less mediocre than I thought it was when I first played it. I'll be interested to try it again, because I was pretty disappointed. But then we've got another nerf to the Prinz Ruprecht, which is not necessarily unexpected considering the nerfs to the Schlieffen. Ruprecht gets more or less the same nerfs in the sense that its secondary reload time is increased. Nothing on the main guns, though, so not quite as harsh as what the Schlieffen got. And then San Louis. San Louis is fairly unpopular, says Wargaming. Oh, really, is it? Yes. And she didn't feel like much of an upgrade over the Charles Martel, which is absolutely true. So they're increasing her damage output to give her a greater presence in the battle. The main battery reload time is getting a pretty significant buff. The base reload time on the upgraded guns goes from 10 seconds to 8.5. So if you build into that, San Louis is going to have a fairly fast reload, and that might in fact make it a little bit more desirable to play, which is nice. Neptune, likewise, is getting a buff because Wargaming says Neptune is kind of in an odd spot between Edinburgh and Minotaur, which is also true. So they're decreasing the reload time on the main batteries by half a second. They're giving it a little bit of a concealment buff, and they're giving the smoke firing penalty a little bit of a buff as well. I think these are all nice changes to see, honestly. They make a lot of sense, and it's nice to see ships like San Louis and Neptune, especially, getting a little bit of love because I think they needed it. Something that didn't need any more love, though, was, of course, the Alan M. Sumner, which is a ridiculous destroyer at Tier 8 that I think is actually better than the successor, which is the Gearing at Legendary Tier. This is basically the Gearing, only better. Or at least it was, because it's getting nerfed. They're giving a nerf to the main battery reload time, reducing the torpedo range from 16.5 to 12, increasing the detectability by sea just a little bit, as well as the other detectabilities by air and inside smoke. So I think this nerf puts the Sumner in a place where it's going to be a clear upgrade over the Fletcher, but at the same time, it's not going to be better than the gearing. So that's good. Although nothing about the hull size of the Sumner, because I think one of the reasons this ship is better is that it's got a smaller hull than the gearing does. There's some ancient problem in World of Warships PC with the gearing's hull size being not quite right. I think the Sumner's is, but the gearing may not be. Could be wrong on that, but in any case, it makes sense to nerf this ship because it probably shouldn't be better than its legendary tier counterpart. And good news for the Kitakazi. I don't know why they put it in the game the way they did. It was actually, I think, a little bit worse than the Akizuki at tier 7. Now they're giving it a buff. So the main battery reload time is reduced from 3.3 seconds to 2.8, which, even though that is a pretty small number on paper, that is a massive impact on its DPM, especially coupled with the other buff, which is increasing the HE shell pen from 20 to 30 millimeters. That's going to mean you pen a ton of cruisers, a ton of, well, every destroyer, and of course you'll pen the superstructure on battleships and maybe, the bows on battleships that have like 27 millimeter plating and stuff like that. So this should really increase the efficacy of the Kitakazi and probably make it worth playing. I will be very excited to test out this ship in particular after this buff. I'm really, really happy to see this. And then a couple more changes for Tier 7. Of course, the Hampshire, which we rented when it was available, was really cracked. So they're nerfing the main battery reload by 1 second. And I think it's still going to be cracked even after they do that. But we'll see. Monarch, which I've always thought was an extremely mediocre battleship that isn't worth really playing at all, is getting a buff. I know people like this ship, but I think it's trash, honestly. So they're buffing the HP by a significant amount, which is nice. They're giving it a pretty good rudder shift for a battleship at 15 seconds. They're doing something to the fire resistance multiplier because each ship actually has a resistance multiplier for fires. And it looks like that's a buff, which I think essentially means the ship is slightly less likely to catch fire. Of course, that's nice. Anti-aircraft firepower improved. Not really any specific detail on that, but who cares because AA is kind of useless anyway. And minor visual changes. So Monarch, quite the substantial buff. And, well, I think people might be a little bit sad about this one. Kansas, which is kind of crazy, at the tier 7 is getting a nerf. The maximum AP shell damage is getting reduced pretty substantially, and the reload time is getting increased by a second. Honestly, I don't think this is going to be that big of a deal for the Kansas because even though this is lower damage, you can still buff it by using Azur Lane, New Jersey, gyrating drill bits, those kind of things. And the extra second on the reload is not going to make or break the ship. Honestly, if they really wanted to nerf this in a meaningful way, I think they would have to sort of uncrack the accuracy because the accuracy on this thing is nuts. Glad they're not doing that, or at least this doesn't say they're doing anything to the accuracy, but that really, I think, would be the nerf that should be applied to Kansas, if one is going to be applied. And then the ship with which we end all of our streams, Charles Martel, Chuck Martin, Chuck the Hammer, the best cruiser at tier 7, not really, but Charles Martel getting a buff. Main battery reload reduced by half a second, so suddenly it's going to do a little bit more DPM. I don't think that's a very big change, but it's nice to see it because I love the Charles Martel, and now it'll be even more efficient at dealing damage. San Diego. San Diego sucked when it was debuted in this game. No doubt about that. It was not good. And Wargaming recognizes that, so they are buffing it. They're giving it some more HP. They're doing some fancy work with the HP distribution across the hull. The sap shells are getting a buff to their damage from 1800 to 2300. The main battery reload booster duration is increased by 1 second, but the reload is decreased by half a second. I don't know how much of a difference this will make for the San Diego, which is really not good, but maybe it'll give this ship a new life and maybe it'll become worth playing. Who knows? But we'll have to take a look at it. Mogami, very old ship in this game, one of the originals, also getting a buff. It's nice to see that they're going and buffing these ships, which clearly need a little bit of love. The buff isn't very big, though. It's just a little bit of extra damage for the HE, and the main battery reload time is reduced by 1 second. So, Mogami getting a little bit of love. Nice to see. And then we've got Riga, which, as Wargaming says, and I agree with this, has always been an oddball. It very much does seem like the low point in the line following the Tallinn, which is excellent, and then the Petropavlovsk, which even in its nerfed state in this game is still pretty crazy and tanky. Riga really did feel like a low point to me, and this is nice to see because this is exactly what I think that ship needs. The main battery shell grouping is getting buffed by 2.5%. I always thought Riga's accuracy, oh, and the dispersion is getting buffed by 9%. So these two things are good because I thought Riga had no excuse for having the inaccuracy it did on its guns. It was a source of frustration for me and the reason why I wasn't too hot on the ship. But now that this accuracy is improved, I think probably the Riga is going to end up being very good. Also, the reload time on the guns is decreased, which is also going to help it deal damage. And then we've got these secondary battery modifications for 3 cruisers. Okay. High tier cruisers with the ability to mount 4th slot modifications now have access to the secondary battery mod 3 if they have secondary guns. Well, that's interesting, but I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make for things like Napoli, for example. Because secondary battery mod 3, I believe, is the one that buffs the DPM. Doesn't do anything to the range, and so cruisers like Napoli, for example, or A Gear, which at least theoretically have usable secondaries, will now be able to have them reload faster. I don't know how big of a difference that really is if you can't extend the range, and you really can't, at least not to the extent that secondary battleships can. So, interesting addition, but I think more work is required for these secondary cruisers. But I think the best part of this balance article: historical camos. Historical camouflages can now be obtained in exchange for paint, and there's a gigantic list of ships that have access to this now. There's not too many at tier 3, or rather tier 4 here, but there is a lot between tier 5, tier 6, tier 7, tier 8, and the legendary tier. It is more or less, I think, pretty much every ship that has one of these camos available. So that is fantastic to see because some of these things have been sitting in the port for months, maybe even years, with camos that you can see if you go into the camo section of the ship build, but you can't actually make them because for whatever reason they're not allowed to be made. But now they are. So we can finally give perma camos, perma historical camos to a lot of these ships. And some of them I think look really nice. So I'm honestly pretty excited about this. But that is it for the balance report and the patch notes. So a lot of interesting stuff coming for this update, particularly when it comes to all these balance changes, which overall I think are really good. I don't think I see anything that stands out here that I really disagree with. And a lot of this, I think, is based on feedback because everybody has been telling Wargaming that San Luis is not great, that there's no reason for Sumner to be as powerful as it is, that Kitakazi is also not great. And yeah, so it's nice to see that they're responding to that feedback and buffing these ships, which clearly need buffed, and, nerfing some ships that could stand to get hit with that nerf hammer at least a little bit. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about the update in the comments, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.